Atlantic, spring 1943. Lieutenant John Howell sits in the left seat of a consolidated B-24 Liberator, call sign from Coastal Command. 4 Pratt & Whitney engines drone at patrol power, red lamps dim in the cockpit. The aircraft rides at 500 feet, nose trimmed level, hatches locked. The crew works by checklists, but the atmosphere is heavier than routine. They are carrying something new. The bomb bay doors are sealed but ready. Inside rests a cylinder just over 7 feet long, weighing close to 680 pounds. Its diameter is 19 inches, stubby compared to a depth charge. The men call it the mine, because that is what the paperwork says. Official documents never mention guidance, never mention listening. They simply say, mine, Mark 24. Yet every man aboard knows it is no ordinary mine. It can hear. The radar operator leans forward at the scope. The set, warmed up for nearly an hour, pulses across a sector of ocean where convoys travel like shadows. A faint contact flickers on the screen, then another. The shape is consistent with a surfaced submarine. Howell glances once, then holds course. Training says silence is essential. Radio chatter could mask the only thing that matters, the sound of a U-boat's screws once it dives. 12 months earlier, no crew would have had such an option. In 1942, Allied anti-submarine warfare meant depth charges and guesswork. Aircraft could patrol, they could force boats down, but kills were rare. Operational research calculated that only 9.5% of depth charge attacks produced confirmed results. That meant for every 10 times a plane dropped its racks, 9 attacks did nothing but scare the submarine. The sea swallowed the effort, and U-boats survived to kill again. Operational Research Section, Coastal Command Report, December 1942. Confirmed kill rate of airborne depth charge attacks stands at 9.5% based on 390 engagements. The figure was stark. For Howell, that meant odds stacked against him. Convoys still lost dozens of ships each month. May 1942 had been called Black May by some, not for the Germans, but for the Allies. 41 ships lost in the Atlantic lanes that month alone, over 200,000 gross tons. For every merchantman sunk, there were survivors in lifeboats, drifting, hoping for an escort to find them before exposure or another torpedo did. Air patrols could circle, drop bombs, but effectiveness stayed low. Would you fly 10 hours to drop steel that missed 9 times out of 10? The new cylinder in Howell's bomb bay promised something different. Engineers claimed it did not need the exact coordinates of a hull. It would listen once in the water, turn toward the rhythm of propellers, and close in. Small warhead, just 92 pounds of Torpex, but precision meant more than brute force. The mission profile said, disable, not obliterate. A crippled U-boat could not reach convoy lanes. That was enough. The pilot's hand hovers near the trim wheel. The navigator calls bearing and distance. Contact steady, range closing. The radar operator marks it with grease pencil on a transparent plot. Procedures are clipped, not dramatic. They have practiced dozens of times. Tonight the contact is real. Howell thinks of the cargo holds below them, steel, food, tanks, fuel, everything moving across the Atlantic. A single U-boat, Type 7 or Nye, could sink 20,000 tons in a patrol. That was the capacity of an entire convoy line. Against that, one aircraft seemed a weak shield. Until this weapon. Document language made it simple. Drop after confirmed submergence. Stay quiet. Circle wide. Observe for oil, bubbles, or debris. Re-attack only if necessary. The word torpedo never appeared. The cover name mine stayed in place. Secrecy was not optional. It was doctrine. Would you trust a weapon kept off the books? The aircraft descends slightly, altitude just under 300 feet. At this height, the sea is black but readable. The crew strains eyes for foam or wake. The radar blip fades, then vanishes. The boat has dived. Howell knows that is the moment the cylinder matters most. A depth charge would require a guess at heading, depth, speed. One wrong calculation, and the charges explode yards away, wasted. Tonight, only one drop will be made. Old doctrine. Dozens of drums rolled into the sea, explosions hammering blindly. New doctrine. One listening ear, released at the right second. Visual math made simple. One guided shot replaces 10 barrels of steel. After action report, Coastal Command, 15th May 1943. Aircraft released one mine on submerged contact, oil and debris observed after 4 minutes. The crew holds silence. Engines steady, radios off. The bomb bay doors open with a long hydraulic sigh. The bombardier leans on the sight, thumb close to release. Howell nods once. The signal is wordless. A clunk, then the mine drops free, tail first, vanishing into Atlantic darkness. Noise meant risk. Silence meant survival. The bomb bay doors close, the hydraulics groan, then settle. Inside the cockpit, only the sound of 4 engines remains. No one speaks. The crew has been briefed. Once the weapon is in the water, silence from above is essential. Radios could mask propeller sound. Sharp turns could add cavitation from the aircraft's own slipstream. Doctrine says, release, then hold still. The cylinder enters the Atlantic with less splash than a barrel. Its tail propeller spins up, motor pushing at slow speed, about 12 knots. The seeker in its nose begins listening. 4 hydrophones triangulate, feeding signals to vacuum tubes inside. No digital logic, just analog sorting. Engineers built it to ignore random noise, wave crashes, sonar pings, even distant gunfire. The one thing it wants is the rhythm of screws, steady and periodic. Would you trust 4 microphones to find steel in an ocean? The U-boat crew below is fighting time. They dived after radar contact, hoping to escape. In the control room, gauges show depth increasing past 50 meters. Orders go out. Reduce speed. Quiet screws. Every submariner knows the threat of depth charges. They expect explosions, not something listening. Cutting speed has always been the defense. The boat's diesel engines are silent. Electric motors hum at low revolutions. Cavitation should vanish. Interrogation. U-boat POW, June 1943. We cut screws immediately after radar. Then we waited. But the ocean does not go quiet. Even slowed, a U-boat makes sound. Cavitation bands are like fingerprints, blade edges biting water. The seeker's logic compares left, right, front, rear. It turns rudder, adjusts angle. Slowly, it homes. Above, Howell circles at wide arc. Altitude steady, 300 feet. The navigator marks time on a chart. 2 minutes pass. 3. The bombardier peers through blister windows, eyes searching for signs. Procedure says, observe for slick, bubbles, or debris. Re-attack only with confirmation. Patience is harder than noise. What kills first, the weapon or the waiting? At 4 minutes, a change. A thin discoloration appears on the surface, not natural foam, but oil seeping upward. The slick widens with the current. Then small bubbles form a ragged trail. The co-pilot points without speaking. The camera operator switches on gun camera film, recording every frame. Patrol log, 26th May, 1943. Oil slick observed after 4 minutes. Debris sighted after 6. By the 6th minute, fragments appear, splinters of cork, a strip of wood. No great explosion, just evidence rising from below. That is by design. The weapon carries 92 pounds of torpex, less than a depth charge. It is not meant to shatter a hull, but to cripple, bend shafts, rupture tanks, force a boat to surface. A disabled submarine cannot escape convoy lanes. That is enough. Would 1 pot of oil on water be proof of success? The navigator notes wind drift, about 12 miles per hour, marking slick direction. The tally board in the Liberator's cabin gains a chalk hash. No celebration, no cheer. Procedure is evidence, then report. Howell keeps circling, eyes locked on the widening patch. He knows each minute is a page in the after-action report. Each observation will be measured against doctrine. Escort Memo 1943. Verify result by oil and debris. No confirmation without. Inside the submarine, men scramble. Bulkhead leaks. Battery fumes spread. Pumps fail to keep up. The captain orders blow tanks, but controls respond slowly. The weapon did not need to destroy, it only needed to damage. Flooding spreads in compartments. Crew fight, but silence does not save them. Above, the sea shows the result in oil and air. Howell circles one final orbit. The bombardier confirms, slick at 200 yards length, bubbles constant. The camera operator stops the reel. The mission log is closed. They will not drop again. Doctrine says one shot, one check, then return. The bomb bay now carries only empty racks. The new weapon works, and they know it. One guided ear outperformed 10 blind barrels. Noise meant risk. Tonight, silence delivered the kill. The Liberator levels course for home. Fuel check shows margin tight, but safe. Howell sits back, not relaxed, just steady. The crew moves into routine after-action rhythm. Navigator plots, return track, radio operator prepares coded contact report, camera film is stowed. The new weapon remains unnamed in their voices. On paper, it will be one word: mine. The debrief process is clear. Crews do not say torpedo. They are instructed never to use the term. Even in mess talk, they keep to the cover name. WWII memos made secrecy absolute. WWII cover note, 1943. Mark 24 is to be administratively classified as a mine. All references to homing characteristics prohibited. Howell writes notes on his clipboard. Time of contact, time of release, altitude, airspeed, sea state, position. He includes 4 minutes to first oil, 6 minutes to debris. Each item goes into the after-action report. The navigator copies coordinates onto the map margin. The bombardier logs batch number of the weapon. Detail is mandatory. Every drop is evidence for or against the weapon's value. Would you trust results hidden behind a false name? Back at base, the ground crew waits as the Liberator rolls to halt. Engines spool down, propellers click slower, then stop. Silence again, but not the silence of risk, this one relief. The men climb down, tired, but aware they have witnessed something different. Most air patrols end without visible result. Tonight they bring film, notes, and oil on water. The intelligence officer collects documents. He stamps each sheet secret. The gun camera reel is stored separately. Reports will go not only to Squadron HQ, but also to operational research. Each observation, slick length, bubble trail, debris type, feeds into statistics. The goal is not stories, but numbers. Numbers prove the weapon's worth. Coastal Command or Digest, June 1943. Aircraft sections with mine outperformed baseline by factor of 2. The ratio matters. Where classic depth charges gave 9.5% kills, mine drops already show near 18% in early tallies. That figure alone justifies production. It means convoy survival rates rise, tonnage saved, sailors alive. In visual math, one guided drop equals 10 wasted barrels avoided. Fewer ships lost, fewer lives taken by torpedoes. In the mess hall, crews talk quieter than usual. They do not know the science inside the weapon. They only know procedure, radar contact, submergence, release, silence, circle. Then oil. That sequence replaces old doctrine. They may not cheer, but they feel the difference. Old rule, barrage the ocean. New rule, let sound do the aim. For Howell, the night stays etched. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just steady sequence, contact, dive, drop, wait, slick. He thinks of the convoys that will pass safer because one U-boat is crippled. He does not call it revolution. He calls it survival math. The U-boat men never heard the weapon coming. In interrogation later, one POW put it in one line: no sound, then the blow. That sentence becomes more evidence. Crews understand the new reality. Silence is no longer shield. Silence can be hunted. Noise meant risk. Silence was survival. Now silence attracts death. The chalk tally on the squadron board moves one notch to the right. Crews passing the board notice but say nothing. The column for mines begins filling. Each mark is not only a kill, but also proof that the game has changed. Depth charges may remain, but doctrine has shifted. One guided shot will replace 10 blind drops. One ear changed the war. Atlantic, early 1942, U-boats dominate the lanes. Convoy escorts scatter, aircraft patrols extend range, but bring little effect. The statistics make the point sharper than any story. In the first 6 months of that year, German submarines sank over 3 million gross tons of Allied shipping. That was more than 400 merchantmen, entire fleets erased on paper. Naval Staff Intelligence Summary, June 1942. Shipping losses Atlantic Theater, 3.1 million GRT, January-June. Each figure represented not just steel, but men, food, tanks, and fuel. A single Liberty ship carried enough flour to feed a city for weeks, or enough gasoline to fuel an armored division for days. Every ship lost meant convoys weakened, fronts delayed. The U-boat campaign threatened to sever the artery between America and Britain. Would you measure survival by the ton? For air crews, frustration grew. Patrols were long, often 10 to 12 hours, yet results were thin. A surfaced submarine spotted at distance would crash dive in less than a minute. By the time aircraft reached release point, only a slick remained. Depth charges could be dropped in a pattern, but the odds were cruel. Operational research calculated success at 9.5% for airborne attacks. That meant out of 100 runs, fewer than 10 produced damage, 90 wasted fuel, explosives, and hours. Old doctrine, throw steel into water, hope some lands close. A single depth charge weighed 200 pounds, a drum filled with explosive. Crews carried half a dozen, sometimes more. A Liberator or Sunderland might drop racks in quick sequence, 200 pounds of Torpex hammering a patch of ocean. If the submarine happened to be within 20 feet, damage occurred. If not, the charges were wasted. The margin was that thin. AAR Coastal Command, 1942. Pattern dropped, no result. Bubbles but no oil, sub not sighted again. Numbers painted futility. Thousands of charges expended, few confirmed kills. Each ton of explosive dropped represented resources diverted from other theaters. Logistics groaned. Yet without change, convoys might not reach Europe at all. In Washington, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, looked for answers. Vannevar Bush, directing the wartime science machine, demanded new approaches. If radar could locate a submarine on the surface, then some device must finish the job underwater. The weapon had to guide itself because no crew could calculate exact depth, bearing, and speed in seconds. Who could make a torpedo here? In 1941, the Navy sponsored the creation of the Harvard Underwater Sound Laboratory, HUSL. Physicist Frederick V. Hunt took directorship. His task was simple on paper: use acoustics to detect and track submarines. In practice, it meant turning theory into a device that could survive shock, seawater, and combat. Hunt's team of young engineers, graduate students, and technicians began sketching circuits on chalkboards. Hunt later wrote in a dry report, "Requirement, torpedo to home, acoustically on target propeller noise, guidance by differential hydrophones." The concept sounded abstract, but the need was urgent. Every month of delay meant another 400,000 tons sunk. Visual math simplified it. One acoustic weapon, if it worked, could replace 10 depth charge runs. Laboratories multiplied tasks. Bell Labs and Western Electric joined to provide electronics. General Electric worked on motors and batteries. Navy Bureau of Ordnance supplied requirements and pressure. The timeline shrank under urgency. Experiments that might take 5 years in peace had to finish in 12 months. OSRD Memo, 1942. Acoustic homing torpedo designated high priority. Immediate development authorized, all divisions. The scientists knew failure was possible, but commanders knew delay was not an option. Early designs lived on benches and in tanks. Engineers built acoustic heads from vacuum tubes and brass. Heat proved an immediate enemy inside cramped nose sections. Tubes warmed, then drifted off frequency under continuous load. Reliability in a quiet lab did not equal reliability at sea. Cooling remained the first technical barrier. Cavitation came next. Propellers generate complex pressure pulses across many bands. The seeker needed a clean blade rate, not random slap from waves. In trials, surface conditions blurred spectra into noise. Waves and bubbles created false maxima, the homing head chased. The result? An instrument that could hear the wrong target. Wrong band, wrong target. Aircraft noise interfered. Engines, prop wash, and gun camera clicks all saturated the hydrophone inputs. When crews circled or throttled, self-noise masked propeller tones below. Designers learned fast. The weapon must ignore shipborne frequencies and favor persistent cavitation bands. Filter design moved from math to survival engineering. Signal discrimination mattered. Chesapeake Bay became the first real proving ground for the concept. Tank trials showed promise. Full-scale sea trials revealed new problems. In November trials, several units lost lock after entry. Hydrophone arrays registered transient spikes the tubes could not reject. Engineers wrote corrections on wet charts and returned to the bench with fresh notes. Sea trials changed assumptions. Chesapeake Bay Trial Report, Nov. 1942. 17 trials. 4 units reported loss of lock attributed to surface cavitation and ambient noise. Trial documented. Hunt paced the wet deck between launches. His notes were brief, technical, and directive. "We must trim the passband and harden tubes to shock," he told his lead technician, voice pitched low over wind. That sentence closed several design meetings and started a lab campaign on tube cooling and ruggedization. Hunt ordered fixes. Thermal solutions followed pragmatic lines. Radiators, copper fins, and seawater jackets found their way into prototypes. Engineers mounted shock absorbers and focused on analog filters to suppress wave spikes. Parallel to hardware fixes, signal processing rules tightened. Require persistence across sensors before steering. The seeker moved from single sample response to consensus logic. Persistence filtered noise. Boston Harbor trials revealed another weakness: merchant wakes and escort foxers. Towed noisemakers introduced broadband clatter that could swamp the homing head. Trials showed Foxer solved an escort problem while creating a seeker problem. The very countermeasure that protected a corvette could blind the acoustic torpedo. Tactics would need choreography, not just engineering. Countermeasure trade-offs defined. Trials required replicable metrics. Engineers adopted strict logging, sample rates, sea state, launch parameters, and a 3-channel verification protocol: tank test, controlled variables; sea test, uncontrolled variables by an order of magnitude. That was visual math. 1 tank confirmed principle, 10 sea runs found failure modes. The lab moved from proof to robustness engineering. 1 tank, 1 theater. Failures produced rapid iterative cycles. Bell Labs adjusted vacuum tube biasing to stabilize frequency response. Western Electric rewired preamps to reject transient spikes. GE redesigned battery packs for longer, cooler discharge profiles. Each vendor sent field technicians to HUSL for hands-on problem-solving. Coordination replaced isolated invention. Industry pulled together. The seeker algorithm also evolved. Original logic steered immediately toward the loudest hydrophone. New logic required a circular search routine, sampling bands across a 360-degree sweep before committing. That change reduced false locks and increased track persistence. It cost precious seconds, but seconds were affordable compared to wasted launches. The trade-off favored verification over haste. Circle search reduced errors. Operational procedures changed with hardware. Pilots were briefed to avoid rapid throttle changes after release. Crews learned to maintain level flight and hold radio silence for specified windows. Bomb aimers timed drops to confirmed dive signatures rather than instantaneous blips. Coordination among radar, visual, and acoustic teams became formal doctrine. The weapon was effective only within an agreed kill chain. Tactics followed tech. Documentation hardened secrecy and method. Test reports, memos, and trial logs carried cover terms and precise checklists. One line in a lab brief, read like an instruction manual, require 3-channel consensus and persistence, 3S before steering. That sentence moved from lab note to flight checklist within weeks. Practical rules beat theoretical elegance every time. Checklist ruled. At sea, verification became Rule 1. Wait for oil, bubbles, or debris before declaring success. Early losses from false positives taught investigators the cost of premature claims. Operational research teams logged each datum and compared sections. Baseline drop patterns on the left, acoustic trials on the right. Field evidence fed back into design and doctrine. The iterative loop was tight and public within the program, secret outside it. Verify before claim. By late winter, the prototypes emerging from HUSL carried changes from bench to hull. Hardened tubes, preamp filters, circular search logic, and revised deployment procedures narrowed failure modes. The system still failed in poor acoustic environments and when countermeasures were deployed. But it had moved from fragile concept to operational tool. Engineers marked progress in incremental numbers, not triumphal headlines. Progress in increments. Hunt recorded one final observation in a short lab note. C is the test. Expectations must match variables. That dry sentence became a guiding principle for all subsequent at-sea trials and squadron briefings. Theory without verification remained only paper. The team learned to treat each failure as a specification update. C defined reality. AAR annexes began to show improved patterns. Where earlier runs produced no confirmation, reworked units returned with oil traces and fragments more often than before. The math favored investment. Each successful guided run conserved dozens of charge-bearing sorties. The program moved from experiment to procurement recommendation. The next step would be production under pressure. Failures refined success. By early 1943, prototypes looked less fragile. Engineers implemented circular search routines. Instead of chasing the loudest impulse, the seeker now rotated, sampling in arcs before deciding. This added seconds, but reduced false locks by half. Reliability outweighed speed. HUSL report, January 1943. Circular search routine decreased erratic steering, target acquisition improved. Tube assemblies hardened after months of failures. Western Electric coated filaments, GE stabilized discharge cycles. Bell Labs rebalanced amplifiers for shock. Each supplier logged fixes in separate notebooks, but all converged toward one design, a torpedo that could keep listening under real ocean conditions. Would engineers trust a weapon rushed to production? Washington did not allow slow perfection. Losses in 1942 had set the tone. Convoys faced 600,000 gross tons lost in some single months. Every delay was measured in ships gone, sailors drowned, supplies denied. Numbers drove urgency more than design elegance. In February 1943, the Navy Bureau of Ordnance authorized limited series production. Factories received blueprints, still stamped with experimental. Assembly lines began shaping cylinders 19 inches wide and 84 inches long, 680 pounds each. They carried small warheads, 92 pounds of Torpex, but enough to cripple. WWII Directive, Feb. 1943. Proceed with Mark 24 mine production despite incomplete finalization. Operational demand requires immediate field issue. At HUSL, Hunt reminded his team, each shipment left the lab as both victory and risk. Failures in the field would undermine confidence, but withholding weapons would cost more lives. His staff worked double shifts, soldering under bare bulbs. Students turned engineers in months, not years. Bell Labs technicians chalked equations on walls. One line stayed for days. One mine. 10 charges. The phrase moved from calculation to belief. It became shorthand for why the program mattered. Production outpaced testing. Engineers shipped units while still correcting filter drift and shock mounts. Aircraft crews received crates with minimal instructions. Pilots were told only the basics. Altitude 300 feet, release speed near 150 knots, do not attack surface targets. After drop, maintain silence. Doctrine was simple because secrecy demanded it. Crews rarely knew how the weapon worked. They called it mine and followed orders. Behind the label hid months of acoustic equations and vacuum tube fixes. Engineers watched from behind desks as their device left the lab for combat. Visual math of urgency, 4,000 units ordered, 10,000 planned, 204 eventually fired. Each one represented a compromise between science and survival. Frederick Hunt summed it in one plain sentence to OSRD, sea trials incomplete, deployment authorized. That line captured wartime engineering, ship it now, fix it later. Delay cost 400,000 tons a month. Spring 1943. Airfields along the Atlantic coast of Britain and North Africa begin to see crates with unfamiliar stenciling. Each wooden box marked only Mine, Mark 24, handle with care. Crews notice the shape, 7 feet long, 19 inches across, 680 pounds. It looks nothing like a mine, but paperwork forbids other words. At one dispersal bay, Lieutenant John Howell receives briefing sheets. The instructions are short. Release at 300 feet, airspeed 150 knots, only on submerged targets. Do not drop on a surfaced submarine. After release, circle silently, engines steady, radios off. Wait for oil or bubbles. Squadron briefing note, March 1943. Do not discuss function. Treat as classified mine. Report results only. Howell scans the paper. No diagrams, no explanation of what lies inside. The crew chief wheels the crate to the Liberator. Men hook the lifting sling, winch it into the bomb bay. It settles into the shackle, a smooth cylinder with a small propeller at the tail. Compared to depth charges, it looks strange. Clean seams, no fuse dial. Would you drop a weapon you cannot name? The ground crew say nothing. They bolt safety pins, close the bay. To them, it is just another load. To Howell, it is a puzzle. Old weapons he understood, bombs, charges, mines. This one has no familiar markings. His navigator jokes, maybe it swims on its own. Nobody laughs. That night, the squadron flies long patrol over Bay of Biscay. German U-boats transit here from French bases to Atlantic lanes. Radar sweeps the waves, scanning for a contact. Hours pass. Finally, the operator calls, "Surface Echo, bearing green 40." The crew stiffens. Howell banks toward the blip. At 6 miles, the submarine appears in moonlight, gray conning tower against Black Sea. Standard drill begins. The U-boat crew see the aircraft crash dive. Howell's bombardier arms the mine. Stopwatch starts. 1 minute to submerge, maybe less. The Liberator closes fast. Howell steadies altitude. At 300 feet, he releases. The cylinder drops, chute opens to slow entry, then splash. Torpedo disappears beneath surface. Coastal Command Log, May 1943. Mine released. Altitude 300 ft entry observed. Circle maintained. Engines throttle back. Crew holds silence. The only sound is prop wash over wings. Seconds tick. Men stare at dark water, searching for signs. At 4 minutes, bubbles rise. At 6, Oil slick spreads, rainbow sheen under moon, then debris, planks, fragments, a cap. The navigator notes coordinates. Camera shutters click. Howell grips the yoke. He does not cheer. Crews rarely do. But the pattern is new. No wasted barrage, no guess. One drop, one slick. Operational research officer at base tallies the result. Contact confirmed. Oil and debris observed. Kill recorded. The ratio improves. Where 10 attacks once yielded 1 sinking, now 2 attacks bring 1. The squadron chalkboard updates. Tally mark under mine. A separate column apart from depth charges and bombs. Crews watch silently. For Howell, the night changes the pattern of war. Depth charges had been noise and futility. This weapon, whatever its name, delivers result after patient silence. He writes in his report, no detonation heard, slick observed, presumed effective. The phrasing is dry, but the implication is clear. Something different has entered the campaign. Old rule, fill the sea with steel. New rule, let the ocean guide steel. May 1943 turned into a proving ground. Coastal Command crews began reporting contacts where the mine did what depth charges rarely had. Each squadron chalkboard now carried 2 columns, charges and mines. Tally marks told a story of change. At RAF St. Aval, crews flew B-24 Liberators out over the Bay of Biscay. A contact appeared on radar one morning, 6 miles south of Brest. The U-boat attempted its standard crash dive. A Liberator released 1 mine at the prescribed window. 5 minutes later, an oil slick stretched 50 yards. The patrol log noted fragments and bubbles. The weapon worked exactly as promised in briefings the air crews never fully understood. Coastal Command, AAR, $12 May 1943. Mine released 300 FT slick and debris confirmed, presumed kill. For pilots like Howell, the experience created a strange mix of certainty and mystery. He could not explain how the device guided itself. He only knew the old routine, drop charges, circle, hope. Now, after one silent release, confirmation appeared on the water. The shift felt immediate, tangible. Would you trust silence more than thunder? Crews began to compare. Depth charge runs filled the sea with concussion. Even near misses left submarines shaken, but often able to escape. With the mine, there was no thunder, only patient circling. Oil, bubbles, wreckage told the result. The numbers reinforced it. Operational research pooled squadron returns. In May, the kill probability per attack almost doubled compared to 1942. Analysts calculated roughly 18% effectiveness, nearly twice the 9.5% figure logged for depth charge strikes the year before. 1 in 5 runs now ended in success, not futility. At base, the OR officer wrote his note with precision. Statistical return shows homing mine efficiency significantly exceeds charge patterns. The words appeared in digest form, but carried meaning for commanders. The balance in the Atlantic was shifting. Howell flew another sortie at month's end. Radar found a surface submarine near convoy route north of the Azores. The target dived quickly. He adjusted course, lined up at altitude, and released. Crew cut chatter. For 7 minutes they orbited in silence. Oil appeared in streaks, then thicker patches. A sailor's cap floated past. The crew chief marked time. Another tally confirmed. Patrol log, 28th May, 1943. Mine release, 7 minutes to slick, kill certain. At debrief, Howell offered no speculation. He wrote only what he saw. No detonation heard, but the signs were clear. OR staff compiled the report and added it to growing evidence. Each verified sinking meant the mine was not experiment, but weapon. Back at HUSL, news traveled in clipped cables. Successful engagements recorded, field results validate homing principle. Engineers read the lines with satisfaction. Hunt pinned one to the board. The laboratory could now point to proof beyond the tank. The weapon survived combat, and it worked. Bell Labs technicians smiled at reports. Months of burned-out tubes and false locks now paid off. The device was no longer an academic project. It was listed in squadron tallies beside bombs and charges. Industry had built something that aircrews trusted without knowing how. Howell described it to his family only as a mine that works. Secrecy orders forbade more. Crews obeyed. Even after confirmed kills, they did not speak of seekers or hydrophones. They wrote only, "Mine released, oil observed." New rule etched itself into practice: drop only after firm contact, then circle in silence. The routine became muscle memory. Crews whispered less about wasted charges. They spoke instead about waiting for the slick. By June, squadron boards filled with new marks. Mines accounted for a growing share of kills. The mood shifted. Aircrews who once believed patrols were futile now saw their work mattered. Howell looked at the board one evening, 4 new tallies in a week, each under the mine column. Old futility gave way to new precision. By early June 1943, headquarters received enough reports to shift tone. What had been an experimental issue now looked like a field asset. Operational research summaries crossed desks in London and Washington. Each line carried numbers, not speculation. Or digest, June 1943, Mark 24, mine 204 issued, 37 confirmed sinkings, 18 damaged. Effectiveness estimated 18% versus 9.5% depth charge baseline. For staff officers, the ratio mattered more than anecdotes. Twice the success rate meant convoys survived longer. Fewer ships lost meant more supplies across the Atlantic. Every percent counted. Crews noticed the shift in briefings. In March, instructions had been vague. By June, checklists were precise. Release altitude 300 ft, entry speed 150 knots, no radio transmissions. Chalk diagrams showed arcs of approach, timing windows, circle patterns after drop. Doctrine hardened into steps. Would you follow a weapon you did not understand? Howell remembered the change clearly. His second confirmed sinking carried the same pattern: radar ping, submarine dive, timed release, then silence. He circled at steady speed, engines humming, minutes dragged. At 5, oil. At 7, debris. He logged it without drama. The OR officer stamped the report. Patrol log, 6 June 1943. Mine employed, slick observed, classified as probable kill. Back at base, chalk tallies grew. Pilots no longer asked whether the mine worked. They asked only how many remained in stock. Word spread through squadrons. The strange cylinder with no fuse dial was producing real results. At HUSL, Hunt underlined cables. Each confirmed success validated his team's months of failure and redesign. Engineers pinned reports to walls, oil slicks, debris fields, coordinates. They marked each one as proof. The science had left the lab and entered the war. Bell Labs sent more components. GE shipped motors. Western Electric soldered preamps in shifts. Production accelerated, yet secrecy remained absolute. Even in victory, reports called the weapon only mine. Crews wrote the cover word, never torpedo. For Howell, secrecy meant distance. He could not tell his family what he dropped. He wrote only of new devices, but in private thought he knew his missions now had weight. Patrols no longer meant empty hours, they meant impact. In June, Allied escorts recorded fewer losses in lanes once plagued by wolf packs. U-boats were forced deeper, sooner. Each air patrol carried a weapon that hunted sound, not surface. Doctrine shifted without public notice. A senior OR officer summed it in one dry sentence: sensor-led attacks now outperform pattern bombardment. That line circulated in staff briefings. Crews read only fragments, but they understood the essence. The Atlantic War had acquired a new balance. Old doctrine filled seas with steel. New doctrine waited for sound, then struck once. One sound, one strike. May 1943 carried a name in staff histories: Black May. In those weeks, U-boats faced pressure from every side. Radar forced them down, Escort groups tightened screens, and for the first time, aircraft carried a weapon that followed sound. Losses spiked. Allied summary, May 1943. 41 U-boats destroyed, the highest monthly total to date. For crews like Howell's, the difference was immediate. Patrols that once felt futile now carried purpose. In April, missions often returned with no result. In May, tallies rose sharply. Each confirmed slick meant one less submarine to threaten convoys. On a mid-May sortie, Howell's Liberator patrolled west of Ireland. Radar operator called contact. Surface blip at 6 miles. The crew readied the mine. U-boat Dove. Howell steadied altitude, dropped at 300 feet. Engines throttled back. Silence. 4 minutes later, oil. 6 minutes, bubbles. At 10, debris. Another tally chalked. Squadron debrief. 15 May 1943. Mine employed. Oil and debris observed. Confirmed sinking. Would you measure progress in slicks and debris? By month's end, multiple squadrons reported similar results. Operational research officers compiled data. Mines accounted for a growing fraction of kills. Analysts noted effectiveness climbing toward 18%, nearly double the depth charge rate. Convoy survival improved. Merchant sinkings fell. The change reached Berlin. Kriegsmarine staff logged unprecedented losses. Units ordered withdrawals from the North Atlantic routes. Wolf packs could no longer operate freely. The hunters became the hunted. For Howell, the change was visible on briefing boards. Maps once crowded with submarine symbols now showed fewer. Convoy arrivals increased, supply lines stabilized, his squadron's mood shifted, patrols mattered. At HUSL, Hunt read cables of confirmed sinkings. Each line carried proof. Engineers pinned reports beside their chalked formulas. What had been theory in January was battlefield fact by May. Production pushed forward, secrecy still intact. Weapons left factories labeled only mine. Crews obeyed cover terms, but results spoke louder. One officer's dry line summed the month. Contact confirmed, homing engaged, kill probability doubled. Black May marked a turning point. Convoys passed with fewer losses. Submarine crews faced weapons they could neither see nor hear until too late. For the first time in years, the Atlantic shifted against them. 1 month bent the curve. By late May, operations rooms in Liverpool and Washington watched graphs tilt. Convoy losses dropped. Submarine sinkings rose. After years of attrition, the Atlantic balance showed reversal. Allied OR summary, May 1943. Allied losses, 34 merchant ships. U-boat losses, 41. Net balance favorable for first time. For convoy sailors, the difference meant arrivals, not obituaries. Cargoes of fuel, wheat, and tanks reached Britain in numbers unseen since 1940. Each U-boat destroyed meant hundreds of lives and thousands of tons spared. Howell saw the numbers firsthand. In March, his squadron chalkboard showed 1 mine kill per fortnight. In May, tallies jumped weekly. By month's end, 5 confirmed in his section alone. Each chalk mark carried weight. Would you trust a piece of chalk to measure survival? At base, morale changed. Crews that once dreaded long patrols now flew with conviction. The weapon they carried worked. Reports circled discreetly, still using cover word mine. But the meaning was clear. They had something new. Operational research memos underlined efficiency. Old patterns required dozens of charges to achieve a sinking. Mines achieved results with single drops. Analysts calculated logistics saved. 1 homing weapon equaled 10 depth charge runs in steel and explosives. HUSL engineers received cables marked secret. Each confirmed kill validated their equations. Hunt posted notes on the lab wall. Field returns confirm acoustic guidance. Students turned technicians saw their work vindicated thousands of miles away. At Bell Labs, engineers measured their own success not in tests, but in tonnage denied to the enemy. One staff memo read simply, Field data confirms homing engagement. Production to continue. Howell flew again in early June. This time, the submarine evaded radar longer, diving sooner. He adjusted course, dropped at exact altitude. Crew circled in silence. Oil surfaced after 5 minutes. Wreckage at 7. The drill no longer felt experimental. It was routine. Patrol log, 3rd June 1943. Mine dropped, slick confirmed, classified kill. At debrief, the OR officer compared with past months. Probability doubled. Convoy survival improved. He spoke without flourish, but pilots understood. Their missions no longer meant wasted effort. They meant turning the war. Berlin read the same shift. Donitz admitted losses were unsustainable. U-boats began withdrawing from North Atlantic lanes. Wolf packs dissolved. The hunters had lost their freedom. For Howell, the change was visible even from his cockpit. Convoys sailed with more confidence. Escorts spread wider. Merchant wakes stretched across ocean lanes without constant interruption. Patrols meant protection, not mere presence. At month's end, one dry sentence circulated in OR Digest. Mine efficiency validated, strategic impact confirmed. The Atlantic had bent. Summer 1943 brought confirmation. Reports from Coastal Command and U.S. Navy tallied results. By July, more than 200 mines had been issued to squadrons. Operational research counted 204 actual drops through the war's end, producing 37 confirmed sinkings and 18 damaged U-boats. Statistical Digest, July 1943. Mark 24 mine. Confirmed 37 kills, 18 damaged. Kill probability, sharks 18%. Depth charges baseline, 9.5%. For staff officers, the figures justified the gamble of premature production. For crews, they validated hours of patrol. A single drop now carried weight equal to multiple barrage runs. Production adjusted accordingly. Original orders called for 10,000 units. Actual manufacture stopped at about 4,000. Less was needed, because efficiency replaced volume. One acoustic torpedo meant saved steel, saved explosives, saved time. Would you prefer 10 guesses or one guided strike? For Howell, the change was not abstract. His section logged multiple sinkings in May and June. Each patrol returned with evidence, slicks, debris, bubbles, that headquarters accepted as proof. Crews now trusted the silent cylinder as much as their radar sets. In squadron debriefs, phrases shifted. No longer probable. Reports more often read confirmed. Pilots saw the difference in convoy survival. Fewer distress calls, fewer flaming wrecks on horizon. Each quiet drop meant another convoy reached port. At HUSL, cables arrived almost daily. Hunt posted statistics on a board. Kill ratios, production numbers, sortie outcomes. Bell Labs engineers sent back adjustments. Western Electric tracked tube lifespans. GE refined motors. The loop from lab to sea tightened. Secrecy persisted. Reports still listed mine in logs, never torpedo. Crews were told only basic release data. The mechanism remained hidden. To them, it was just a cylinder that worked. To engineers, it was proof that sound itself could be a weapon. For Howell, secrecy was irrelevant. What mattered was effect. He flew sorties, dropped cylinders, circled in silence, and saw slicks form. Each tally marked not just a sinking, but a shift in war. By end of summer, Atlantic convoys sailed with reduced loss. U-boat commanders noted danger zones. Donitz shifted boats to other theaters. The Atlantic had grown hostile for hunters. One staff officer wrote in margin of his digest, "Mine changed outcome, precision, volume." For crews and engineers alike, that was the verdict. By autumn 1943, the Kriegsmarine tried its own answer. The weapon carried the designation G-70s, but crews called it Zaunkönig. To Allied sailors, it became known as the Gnat, a small predator listening for propellers. Kriegsmarine order, September 1943. Issue acoustic torpedo to frontline boats. Primary targets, escorts. Unlike depth-running torpedoes, the T-5 homed on screw noise. Its seeker did not search for convoys at large. It locked on the loudest blades in the water. Escorts, not merchants, became its prey. The aim was simple: break the shield, then strike the convoy. First reports reached Allied staffs quickly. In September, HMS Lagan was hit during convoy on 202. Survivors recalled a torpedo that seemed to curve in water. Conventional countermaneuvers failed. Damage forced her out of action. Would you change every escort tactic for one new weapon? For convoy sailors, the fear was immediate. Until then, torpedoes had been straight-line threats. Evasion meant zigzag, turn, increase speed. Now the weapon listened. If an escort ran noisy, it drew the shot. At sea, Howell's squadron received new briefings. Mines worked against submarines, but submarines had their own device against escorts. Charts showed tracks of convoys attacked by GNAT. Officers underlined the new threat. Loud ships equaled vulnerable ships. Admiralty Memo, October 1943. Enemy acoustic torpedo confirmed. Escorts advised to deploy countermeasures. For escorts, first losses hurt morale. HMS Itchen, a river-class frigate, was sunk in September after evading one torpedo only to be struck by another. The toll on crews spread panic. Rumors said the Germans had finally matched Allied science. Howell saw it in convoy formations. Escorts shifted patterns. Where once they closed aggressively, now they spread wider, towing new gear. Foxer, a noisemaker streamed astern, became standard. Its clanking chain and hollow pipes made more noise than screws. The GNAT chased the decoy, not the escort. The trade-off was sharp. Foxer worked, but it flooded sonar with useless sound. Escorts towing decoys lost clarity. They protected themselves, but their eyes closed. Escort AAR, November 1943. Foxer effective in seduction. Sonar degraded severely. For Howell, the countermeasure was visible from above. He saw wakes trailing noisemakers, bubbling froth streaming behind corvettes. Convoy lanes looked cluttered, but necessary. The duel of sound had begun. One side dropped weapons that hunted noise. The other towed devices that screamed louder. Sound became battlefield. Вы сказали «пиши», след часть чат GPT сказал «блок 5», парт 2, лёс 900 слов. Акт Фи, ответ противника, первые успехи и союзные контрмеры. By November 1943, Allied command had no doubts. The German acoustic torpedo was real, and it was lethal. Initial damage tallies showed multiple escorts crippled in just weeks. Escort group records listed HMS Lagan, HMS Itchen, and several U.S. destroyer escorts as early victims. Operational Research Note, November 1943. T-5 effectiveness significant. Escort casualties increased. Immediate adaptation required. For convoy crews, the shock was deep. Escorts had been the shield of the merchant columns. Now that shield cracked. Sailors whispered that the Germans could finally steer torpedoes. Rumors spread faster than verified reports. Would you sail in the screen, knowing you were the target? Howell's squadron flew missions through worsening autumn seas. Convoys beneath him stretched long, but their escorts behaved differently. Ships towed Foxer noisemakers, hollow tubes, chains, and floats that clanked constantly. The devices worked as lures, dragging the gnat away. From the air, Howell saw the pattern. Foxer trails foamed white, dragging far behind sterns. Escorts looked like ships towing anchors. Convoys moved slower, but safer. Escort Diary, November 1943. Foxer streamed, noise constant, crew uneasy, sonar useless astern. The trade-off was painful. With Foxer in water, sonar lost precision. Escorts were harder to blindside, but also less able to hunt. Protection came at cost of detection. Hunt at HUSL read Allied cables with caution. The Germans had reached the same concept from the other side, a weapon listening to sound. For engineers, it confirmed acoustic warfare was not Allied property. For sailors, it meant escalation. In Berlin, reports praised the GNAT. Dönitz declared the device a victory of German science. He urged commanders to exploit the advantage while it lasted. Yet losses in the Atlantic continued. Submarines with GNAT still had to reach firing position. Radar and air patrols forced them down sooner. The weapon helped, but did not reverse the tide. Howell noted the tension in briefings. Pilots were told to keep pressure on U-boats during convoy attacks. Radar pings, lee lights, and mines remained effective. Even if escorts lost one ship, the majority of convoys still survived. By winter 1943, statistics showed balance holding. GNAT had scored kills, but Allied losses were not catastrophic. The countermeasure loop worked. Fokker masked, escorts adapted, and convoys endured. One dry conclusion circulated in Admiralty summary: enemy acoustic weapon, threat contained. Countermeasure reduces effectiveness. The duel of engineers continued. By early 1944, German submarine commanders understood the limits of their new torpedo. GNAT could home on noise, but Fokker dragged it off course. Escorts adapted quickly. Convoy losses stayed lower than Berlin expected. The acoustic advantage did not last. Interrogation, February 1944. We cut screws to reduce cavitation. Silence was survival. U-boats adjusted doctrine. After launch, many skippers ordered engines stopped. Propellers fell quiet, cavitation reduced, and the torpedo lost track. Others tried slow turns or depth changes to confuse seekers. Silence replaced speed as the best defense. Would you trust stopping dead in the water, hunted from above? Convoys shifted as well. Escorts deployed Fokker in pairs, alternating streams to cover lanes. Orders instructed towing ships to remain outside merchant columns to prevent decoys luring weapons into freighters. Charts grew crowded with noise patterns, sonar blind spots, and towed wakes. Escort memo, March 1944. Maintain Fokker spacing, keep merchants clear of noise lanes. For Howell in the air, the sea looked different. He saw convoys trailing strings of bubbles, each escort dragging a clattering tail. At night, radar mapped lanes thick with moving signatures, hard to distinguish. Pilots had to adjust, trusting sonar reports less, relying more on visual cues and oil slick confirmations. At HUSL, Hunt explained the loop to his team. Germans had matched principle with GNAT. Allies had countered with Fokker, each side now designed around the other's soundscape. Engineers called it the War of Noise. For sailors, the effect was physical. Fokker rattled constantly, its metallic clang exhausting crews. Sonar operators strained against interference. Convoy duty already meant fatigue. The new devices added noise to every hour. Yet the numbers told the story. Convoys reached port, sinkings dropped, U-boat morale collapsed. What had seemed a breakthrough weapon for Berlin became another lost edge. One Admiralty line summed up the duel: noise neutralized noise. The Atlantic had become a battlefield of sound. By 1944, engineers applied the same principle below the surface. If aircraft could drop Fido, submarines could launch their own acoustic weapon. The result was the Mark 27, small, slow, but designed to home on escort propellers. Crews called it Cutie. Submarine Patrol Report, August 1944. Mk-27 issued for defensive use. Primary targets, destroyer escorts. The Cutie weighed about 720 pounds, shorter than Fido, and fitted for submarine tubes. Its seeker worked the same way, listening for cavitation bands. Against escorts charging in with depth charges, it offered a last-ditch strike. Would you fire a slow torpedo with hope it turned a hunter away? In training, U.S. submariners practiced launches against escort-like targets. The Cutie was not fast, about 12 knots, but once locked, it did not relent. The goal was not to obliterate escorts, but to cripple them, force them to break contact, and save the submarine. At sea, first reports showed mixed outcomes. Some escorts evaded, others suffered serious damage. In one instance, a destroyer escort chasing a sub in the Philippines took a hit aft and had to limp home. The submarine escaped. For crews under depth charge pressure, the weapon mattered. One submarine commander wrote in his patrol log, "We fired Cutie at closing escort, heard hit, pressure eased, escaped." Engineers at HUSL and Bell Labs tracked feedback. The seeker required fine-tuning for water noise, but the basic principle worked. The acoustic duel now included submarines themselves. By late 1944, several U.S. boats carried Cutie on patrol. It did not match the kill numbers of Fido, but gave submarines a survival edge. In a theater where escorts had grown more aggressive, that edge meant lives. Doctrine followed. Orders advised using Mk-27 defensively when pursued, not offensively against merchants. Captains learned to hold it as insurance. One launch could buy escape. From labs to patrols, acoustic weapons had spread. Air, surface, and subs all joined the sound war. One oar note put it dryly. Cutie altered pursuit geometry. Escorts less confident. The duel of sound deepened. Patrol logs from late 1944 captured the first combat stories of the Cutie. In November, USS Batfish reported launching Mk-27 against a destroyer escort in Leyte Gulf. The submarine had been forced down. After radar contact, depth charges rolled above. The commander ordered one Cutie fired aft. Minutes later, sonar picked up impact. The escort broke off, leaking oil. Batfish slipped away. Patrol log, 28 Nov 1944. Fired Mk-27. One explosion. Enemy ceased pursuit. Would you stake your survival on a weapon you barely tested? For submarine crews, the relief was real. Escorts had grown confident, pressing deeper with hedgehog and depth charge runs. Cutie disrupted that certainty. Even a chance of retaliation made escorts more cautious. In convoy lanes, seconds mattered. A crippled escort meant open lanes for escape. Engineers tracked every case. Reports flowed back through ComSubPac to stateside labs. At Harvard Underwater Sound Lab, Hunt pinned data sheets beside Fido statistics. Bell Lab staff compared seeker performance under Pacific thermals. GE refined motors for better endurance. HUSL memo, December 1944. Mk-27 seeker effective in tropical waters. Heat increases tube noise. Adjust filter bands. Each adjustment meant another patrol saved. For engineers, the war was not only in blueprints. It was in feedback loops, trial, error, correction. Would an engineer at a Boston chalkboard know his formula spared a submarine in Leyte? By spring 1945, multiple submarines had credited Cutie with breaking pursuit. Totals remained small compared to Fido's record, but the principle was proven. Acoustic homing had entered every arm of the fight. Doctrine adapted again. Submarines were told to carry a limited number of Cuties, reserve them for close pursuit. Pilots still held Fido as primary airborne ASW tool, escorts trained with Foxer. Every layer of the ocean had its own acoustic measure. The sound war was now three-dimensional. Engineers who once argued about lamp heating or hydrophone spacing found their work written in patrol logs. For Hunt, that was the final proof. Acoustic weapons were no longer experiments. They were standard. The loop was complete. Even as the war neared its end, secrecy around acoustic torpedoes remained absolute. Crews were still ordered to log Fido and Cutie as mines. Briefings stressed silence. Few men outside specialized units ever knew what guided the weapon. WWII note, February 1945. All references to acoustic homing classified. Use mine in paperwork. For pilots like Howell, it meant flying with a cylinder whose workings were never explained. He knew how to release it, from what altitude, and when. Nothing more. For submarine skippers with Cutie, the same rule applied. Fire and trust. No questions. Would you risk your crew on a secret you could not read? At HUSL, secrecy slowed recognition. Hunt's team knew the stakes but rarely saw field results in detail. Reports came back coded, filtered through operations. Successes arrived as statistics, failures as adjustments to frequency bands. Engineers worked blindfolded but still delivered. Production figures told the pressure story. Fido had been planned for 10,000 units. Only about 4,000 were built. Cutie, fewer still. Yet both left marks far greater than numbers suggested. One homing torpedo equaled 10 depth charge runs. One Cutie launch could turn a deadly chase into escape. Operational Research Summary, May 1945. Acoustic weapons account for 15% of submarine sinkings by air. Escort pursuit reduced. For Howell, secrecy mattered less than results. He circled after a drop, engines throttled back, and watched for slick. Silence told him the weapon was working. For submarine commanders, Cutie's explosion was proof enough. By late 1945, orders finally loosened. War ended, and secrecy began to lift. Engineers could speak of hydrophones, filters, seekers. Hunt wrote post-war notes crediting the device as one of the Navy's most effective innovations. But in combat, it had remained quiet. Crews knew only one word: mine. The war of sound had been fought in silence. By summer 1945, the accounting was clear. Acoustic torpedoes had not been built in vast numbers, but their impact was out of proportion to quantity. Statistical Digest, 1946. Mark 24 launched 204 times. Confirmed results, 37 sinkings, 18 damaged. At first glance, the figures looked modest, but when compared to depth charges, the difference was stark. Classic barrage runs produced only a 9.5% kill chance. Fido's probability was nearly double, about 18%. In operational terms, one homing weapon saved entire flights from wasting loads of explosives. Would you trade 10 depth charge patterns for one guided torpedo? Production orders told the same story. Navy planners had once asked for 10,000 units, only about 4,000 were built. Even so, the stockpile exceeded actual launches many times. The majority were never dropped. The threat alone reshaped tactics. For aviators like Howell, the math became visible in mission logs. A patrol armed with 2 mines could do more damage than a full bay of depth charges. In convoy lanes, every saved hour of searching meant another group of ships made it through. Operational Research Digest, 1945. Kill per sortie rate increased significantly. Convoy loss rates declined accordingly. The contribution added up. Post-war analysis credited acoustic homing torpedoes with roughly 15% of all U-boats destroyed by Allied aircraft after 1943. In the Atlantic War of Numbers, that fraction carried strategic weight. Every month of delay had meant hundreds of thousands of tons lost. Delay cost 400,000 tons a month. The arithmetic was brutal, but for Allied command, it proved the point. Sound had changed the curve. For Howell, the numbers were not abstract. They were missions flown, nights over Blackwater, and moments of silence after release. Patrol log, July 1945. 2 mines carried, no contact. Convoy reached port intact. Many of his sorties ended without an attack. But the presence of the weapon altered confidence. Crews no longer felt helpless when a submarine slipped below. They had something that could chase, not just guess. Would you fly hours over ocean knowing you carried only noise and hope? Before Fido, Howell had circled convoys in frustration, watching U-boats dive and vanish. With acoustic homing aboard, each dive meant opportunity. Even if the torpedo failed, the chase was closer. And when it hit, the result was certain. He remembered one crewman chalking tallies on a board in their hut. Oil slicks confirmed meant another mark. No one cheered loudly. Secrecy orders forbade it. But men smiled, knowing their flights mattered. Debrief slip, August 1945. Mine employment credited with confirmed sinking. Squadron morale improved. When Germany surrendered, Howell had flown dozens of patrols. Some recorded contacts, others routine escort duty. In total, his squadron logged multiple Fido launches with several confirmed kills. To him, the statistics were personal: ships escorted through, sailors alive, missions finished with results. Would one torpedo justify years of engineering? For Howell, the answer was visible in every convoy that reached harbor. As the Pacific War ended, he returned stateside. He carried memories not of laboratories, but of black nights when sound became weapon. His view was simple: aircraft were no longer blind above submarines. Acoustic weapons gave him certainty. After 1945, the files opened slowly. Reports once stamped secret moved into post-war studies. The legacy of acoustic homing was clear: a weapon that turned sound into guidance had shifted the entire balance of anti-submarine warfare. USN Ordnance Report, 1946. Acoustic seeker principle retained for future designs. Homing torpedoes recommended as standard. Engineers who had spent nights in Cambridge labs or Western Electric shops saw their wartime improvisation become doctrine. Harvard Underwater Sound Lab was folded back into civilian research, but the experience carried forward. Bell Lab's work on hydrophones and filters became the basis for sonar arrays in the Cold War. Would you dismantle a lab that had given aircraft ears? Production lines shut down quickly, but design notes survived. Mk-24 and Mk-27 were studied, adapted, and copied into post-war families. Larger warheads, improved seekers, and stronger batteries followed. The baseline was already proven: sound could steer steel. For the U.S. Navy, the conclusion was pragmatic. Acoustic torpedoes did not win the war alone, but they made convoy defense reliable, restored initiative to aircraft, and taught engineers that precision mattered more than volume. One Fido could equal a rack of charges. One cutie could save a submarine. Operational Research Summary, 1947. Sensor-led attack standard. Depth charge barrage obsolete. The Germans had tried to match with T-5 and T-11. Their decoys delayed, but did not reverse outcomes. The lesson for both sides was identical. The undersea battlefield had shifted to sensors, not explosives. Every major navy carried that forward. In the next decade, no torpedo would be built without homing. Noise had become guidance. When the war ended, acoustic torpedoes were still filed under code names. Crews returned home with logbooks marked "Mine." Only in post-war debriefs did the wider Navy learn what those cylinders had done. Training Film, 1946. Sensor-led engagement. Depth charge barrages discontinued. For Howell, memory lingered not on paperwork, but on nights over the Atlantic. He recalled throttling back after release, silence in the cockpit, and then the first line of oil spreading wide below. The tally chalked back at base was not just another mark, it was proof the convoy survived. Would you remember the science or the silence? For engineers, the legacy was different. Hunt's team had turned equations on cavitation into weapons. Bell Labs had bent radio tubes to work underwater. Western Electric had soldered seekers by hand. In each case, civilian labs produced instruments that redrew naval doctrine. By 1946, homing seekers were no longer experimental. They were baseline. Every major navy took the lesson: torpedoes must hear as well as strike. Depth charge doctrine had ended. Interrogation Summary, U-Boat Officer, 1945. We could not hear it until too late. That single line captured the effect better than statistics. Submariners had no defense against silence becoming pursuit. Acoustic weapons had closed the gap. In retrospect, the arithmetic was simple. 204 launches, 37 sinkings, 18 damaged, 4,000 units built, a fraction of total ordnance, but a decisive one. For Howell, the war ended with the thought that mattered most. Aircraft were no longer helpless over submarines. For engineers, It proved sound could guide steel, noise meant risk, silence increased chances. The war of sound had been won.